Have you ever felt spiritually drained, like no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to connect with God? You're not alone. Whether you're facing exhaustion hurt, or even the feeling of being too far gone, these moments of spiritual dry spells are tough. But here's the good news. Even in these seasons, there's hope. In this video, we'll explore practical steps you can take when you're spiritually unmotivated, so you can keep moving forward no matter how heavy the struggle feels. Keep going. God's got a plan for you. Following God can be tough. And let's be honest, there are times when we just don't feel like it. We all go through moments where our spiritual motivation wanes and we feel distant from God. Maybe you're feeling tired, defeated, or just spiritually dry. Trust me, I get it. I was in a team meeting recently, and I had to be honest with my team, I was struggling. Even as someone who leads, sometimes I get so caught up in helping others, giving all my time and energy, that I neglect my own relationship with God. That's the thing, sometimes we can get so wrapped up in everything else that our connection with God takes a back seat. And you know what? It's okay to admit that. We all hit those moments where we feel spiritually drained, and it's easy to think we've messed up too much or that we're too far gone to keep going. But I'm here to tell you that God still has a plan for you, even in the middle of those dry seasons. Maybe you're in that place right now feeling like you've messed everything up, or that you're too far gone to make a comeback. Or maybe you're just so tired that the thought of pressing forward feels impossible. The good news is, you're not alone. In this video, we're going to look at 7 powerful truths that can help you push through when you feel spiritually unmotivated. Whether you're hurting weary or just in a funk, there's encouragement in these truths. Let's start with the first one. If you feel like you've messed everything up, just keep going. Take a look at Moses. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, we read about a child who grew up and became the son of Pharaoh's daughter. That child was Moses, who would one day become the great leader of Israel and free God's people from Egypt. Moses had a life full of miracles. God used him to bring the 10 plagues on Egypt, and he brought the law to Israel. But despite all of his accomplishments, Moses still messed up. In Acts chapter 7, verses 23 to 24, we read that Moses, at about 40 years old, killed an Egyptian in anger. He fled, and for 40 years, God didn't speak to him. 40 years. Can you imagine that? After all the good he did, he felt the consequences of his mistakes, yet God still used him. Yes, Moses had major failures. He even got angry with God's people, and at one point God told him he wouldn't enter the promised land. But despite all that, Moses kept going. He didn't let his failures define his future. And here's the thing. When you feel like you've messed up too much, remember Moses. God knows all your mistakes, and he's still calling you to move forward. If God could still use Moses, he can still use you. So if you're feeling like you've ruined everything, don't quit. Just keep going. But maybe you're thinking, I'm too far gone. That brings us to point 2. If you feel like you're too far gone, keep going. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 1, we read about Joshua, Moses' successor, sending 2 spies into Jericho. They stayed at the house of a woman named Rahab, who, according to the Bible, was a prostitute. Rahab had lived a life that was far from God, but when she heard about the God of Israel, she had faith. She pleaded with the spies, asking them to save her and her family when God's judgment came to Jericho. And you know what? God did just that. Rahab's faith saved her. And not only did she survive the destruction, but she was also brought into the genealogy of Jesus, as mentioned in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. Now think about that for a second. Rahab had a past that many would think disqualified her from God's plan. But God didn't see her as too far gone. In fact, he used her in his story in a powerful way. So if you're feeling like your life has been full of mistakes, bad decisions, and missed opportunities, like you're too far gone, take heart. Rahab's story proves that no one is beyond God's grace. He has a plan for you too. So if you're feeling too far from God, don't stop now. Keep going. And maybe you're not just feeling distant, you're feeling exhausted. You've been fighting, serving, and pushing through for so long that you're just too tired to keep going. But here's the truth. If you feel like you just can't go on, keep going. Elijah the prophet in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 17 was a man who did incredible things for God. He confronted evil kings and defeated the prophets of Baal in a showdown on Mount Carmel. Yet after all that, he was hunted by Queen Jezebel and fled for his life. He was physically and emotionally drained. so much so that he prayed to God to take his life. Can you relate to that kind of exhaustion where you feel like you have nothing left to give, and you're ready to quit? I know I have. But God didn't take Elijah's life. Instead, he brought him to a place of rest, provided him food, and gave him strength. And in that quiet moment, God reminded Elijah that he wasn't alone. God is always with us even when we feel like we've reached our breaking point. When you're exhausted, remember Elijah. Rest, recharge, and know that God's strength is there to help you keep going. Just because you feel tired now doesn't mean you'll always feel this way. Take it one step at a time and trust that God will help you through. Now let's talk about another feeling that can leave us spiritually unmotivated. When you feel like there's no end to your hurt, keep going. I know it's tough when it feels like the pain will never stop, but there's encouragement to be found in the life of Job. In Job, chapter 1, verses 1 to 2, we learn about Job, a man who was blameless and upright. Job loved God, he feared God, and he shunned evil. But even though Job did everything right, he faced some of the greatest tragedies anyone could imagine. He lost his health, his wealth, and most painfully, he lost his children. His grief was so intense that, as the Bible describes, he was covered in painful boils all over his body. Job's suffering went on for a long time, and we can feel his pain through every word. This wasn't just some short-term loss, it was relentless, a storm that kept battering him. What's so powerful about Job's story is that despite losing everything, he continued to trust God. His friends came to comfort him, but instead they criticized him, suggesting that his suffering was the result of his own sin. Yet Job refused to curse God. Instead, he asked questions and expressed his hurt, but his faith never fully wavered. Job showed us that it's okay to wrestle with God in our pain, to ask hard questions, and still choose to trust him. Job's story is one that has inspired millions of people throughout the years because it reminds us that pain doesn't mean God has abandoned us. It may feel like there's no end to your hurt, but remember, God sees you. He understands your pain more deeply than anyone, and he promises that he will use it for good. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, it says that God works all things together for the good of those who love him. That includes the pain. So if you're hurting today, don't give up. Like Job, keep going. God is with you even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Next, let's tackle something many of us experience when we feel disconnected from God. When you feel like no one understands you, keep going. Sometimes we can feel so isolated in our struggles that it seems like no one truly gets what we're going through. But when that happens, remember Mary, the mother of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 18, we read about Mary who became pregnant with Jesus through the Holy Spirit. Now imagine being a young woman engaged to be married and finding out you're pregnant, not by your fiancé but by the Holy Spirit. Talk about an impossible situation. In the culture of her time, being pregnant outside of marriage was not only considered scandalous, it was something that could ruin your life. Mary must have faced intense shame and confusion. She likely felt completely misunderstood by those around her. But despite the fear and isolation, Mary chose to trust God. She said yes to God's plan, even though it meant facing rejection and ridicule. She had to walk through that painful process, but she knew that God had a purpose for her life. And because of her faith, she became part of a story that changed the world forever. You may feel misunderstood, like no one gets the unique challenges you're facing as you follow God. But Mary's example shows us that God understands. Even when you feel alone or like your situation is too much for anyone to comprehend, know that God sees you. He's with you in your journey, and he's leading you for a purpose that may be beyond your current understanding. So if you're feeling isolated or like your struggles are too unique for anyone to relate to, remember Mary's faith. Even though her path was tough, she trusted God with everything she had, and he honored that faith in a big way. Keep going. God knows what you're going through, and he's with you every step of the way. Now let's move on to the feeling that can leave us spiritually dry and unmotivated. When you feel like you're not going anywhere, keep going. This one really hits home because sometimes, when we feel like we're stuck, we start doubting the progress we've made. But remember Joseph's journey and how God used his waiting time to shape his character. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 3, we read about Joseph, who was loved deeply by his father Jacob. His father even gave him a beautiful coat of many colors, which made his brothers jealous. They hated Joseph so much that they sold him into slavery, and Joseph ended up working for Potiphar, an officer in Egypt. Now, despite Joseph's integrity and his refusal to sleep with Potiphar's wife, he ended up being falsely accused and thrown into prison. Can you imagine that Joseph was doing the right thing, yet he was still punished? And then he spent years in prison doing nothing but waiting. It would have been easy for Joseph to give up, to think that his life was over, or that God had forgotten him. But in those years of waiting, God was doing something in Joseph. God was preparing him for something bigger, a role that would one day save nations. Joseph's time in prison wasn't wasted. It was a time of character growth, patience, and preparation for his future purpose. If you feel like you're not making any progress, remember Joseph. Even when life feels stagnant and it seems like nothing is happening, God is working behind the scenes. Your waiting is never wasted. Sometimes God allows us to go through those slow seasons because He's building our faith, patience, and character for what's ahead. Keep going. Just like Joseph, your time of preparation will eventually lead to something great. And finally, let's address the feeling that can be the hardest to overcome when you feel like God has left you. Keep going. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, the author reminds us that God has said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." But sometimes it feels like God is silent, doesn't it? I think of the disciples crossing the Sea of Galilee in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 40. A storm hit and the boat was being tossed around by the waves. The disciples were terrified, but Jesus was asleep in the boat. They woke him up crying out, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus calmed the storm, and then he asked them why they were so afraid. Even though he was physically present with them, the disciples felt like he had abandoned them in the midst of the storm. When you feel like God is far away, remember the disciples in that boat. God is never truly gone sometimes. He's just silent. And when that happens, it's an opportunity for you to grow in faith. You can trust that He's right there with you even in the silence. Keep going even when it feels like you're alone. God's promises remain true. He will never leave you nor forsake you. We've covered some of the big challenges that can make us feel spiritually unmotivated. But I want to encourage you with this final thought. If you feel like you're stuck or falling behind, remember God is still working in you, and He's not done with you yet. One of the toughest feelings to shake off is when you feel like you're simply not going anywhere. It can seem like you're doing everything right, yet progress feels so slow or even non-existent. And when we feel stuck, it's easy to get frustrated and think, is this all there is? Is this the best I can do? But the truth is, the path we're on isn't always immediately clear, and God often works in ways we don't see at first. Take Joseph's story, for example. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 3, we find that Joseph was his father, Jacob's favorite son. Jacob loved Joseph so much that he gave him a coat of many colors, which caused his brothers to hate him. This jealousy and hatred led to Joseph being sold into slavery by his own brothers. For Joseph, things only got worse from there. He was falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit and thrown into prison. Joseph spent over 2 years in that prison, not because of something he had done wrong, but because of his integrity. Now imagine how Joseph must have felt. He had done the right thing, and yet everything seemed to fall apart. He could have given up. He could have let bitterness and frustration take over. But Joseph didn't do that. He kept going. Even though it seemed like his life was stuck in one place, God was preparing him for something much bigger. Eventually, Joseph was released from prison and became the second most powerful person in Egypt, where he saved his family and the entire nation from famine. What Joseph didn't know during those long years in prison was that God was using that time to shape his character and prepare him for leadership. Sometimes the process feels slow, but it's in those moments of waiting and uncertainty that God is at work transforming us into the people He wants us to be. If you're feeling stuck or like you're not making any progress, I want to remind you, just because things are quiet doesn't mean God isn't working. Keep trusting, keep moving forward, and when the time is right, God will open the doors you need to walk through. Maybe you're wondering, how can I keep going when it feels like nothing's changing? The answer lies in trusting God's timing. Just like Joseph, we might not see the purpose in our struggles right away, but we can trust that God is using every moment to grow us. It's a tough lesson to learn, but it's one that pays off in the end. God isn't in a hurry, and neither should we be. Now for the next point that often plagues our hearts. When you feel like you've messed up too many times, keep going. It's easy to look at our past mistakes and think that we've ruined everything. Maybe you've made decisions that you regret, or you've failed in ways that feel like they disqualify you from God's love. But here's the truth. God's love for you isn't based on your perfection. It's based on His grace. Think about Moses. Moses had some serious failures. Not only did he commit murder, but he also spent 40 years in the wilderness before God even spoke to him again. 40 years of silence, 40 years of waiting. Moses must have wondered, have I messed up too much for God to use me? But God didn't give up on Moses, and He won't give up on you either. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, we see Moses' early life, one filled with challenges and mistakes. Yet when Moses was ready, God used him to free the Israelites from Egypt and lead them to the Promised Land. Moses had a checkered past, but God used every bit of it for His glory. No matter what you've done, no matter how many mistakes you've made, God still has a plan for you. So if you've fallen, if you've messed up, don't let that stop you. Keep going. God isn't finished with you yet. And if you ever feel like you've been too far gone, like there's no way to get back, think about Rahab. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 1, we read about Rahab, a woman whose profession was anything but holy. Yet despite her past, God saw her faith and used her to protect the spies of Israel. And not only that, Rahab became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. She was included in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5 as one of Jesus' ancestors. Rahab's story is a reminder that no one is beyond God's reach. No matter how far you feel you've fallen, God's grace is greater than your mistakes. So if you're feeling spiritually dry or distant from God, I want to leave you with this message: keep going. When you feel like you can't keep moving forward, remember that God's love for you is unwavering. When you feel like your past is disqualified, you know that God is still calling you. And when you feel like you're stuck or not making any progress, remember that God is at work even when you can't see it. Keep moving forward one step at a time and trust that God is doing something amazing in your life. You may not feel it today, but every step you take in faith is bringing you closer to the breakthrough God has for you. Just as He has used countless people throughout history, He can and will use you too. So no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, don't give up. Keep going. God has a plan and He's not finished with you yet. Keep trusting, keep hoping, and keep moving forward. You are never alone, and your best days are still ahead of you. As we continue, let's take a closer look at another challenge many of us face when we're spiritually unmotivated, feeling like God is far away. Sometimes it feels like God has abandoned us, and no matter how hard we try, we can't seem to hear Him. But the truth is, God's silence doesn't mean He's distant. It might actually be a sign of His closeness. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, we're reminded of God's promise, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Even in those moments when it feels like God isn't speaking, He's still right there with you. There are times when we feel abandoned, like our prayers are going unanswered, and it's easy to think that God has left us. But I want to encourage you, God's silence is not a sign of His absence. Remember the disciples on the boat in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 40. When they were crossing the Sea of Galilee, a fierce storm suddenly hit, and the disciples were terrified. The winds were howling, and the waves were crashing into their boat. The situation seemed hopeless. Yet in the middle of this storm, Jesus was asleep. Can you imagine the panic they must have felt? They woke Him up crying, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" But what happened next was remarkable. Jesus calmed the storm with just a word, and then He asked them why they were so afraid. I love this story because it shows us that sometimes in the midst of our storms, God is right there even when we don't feel His presence. The disciples thought they were alone, but Jesus was with them the entire time. It's like that in our lives too. Just because we don't always feel God's presence doesn't mean He's not with us. Sometimes He's allowing us to grow in faith, teaching us to trust Him even when we can't see Him working. If you feel like God is far away, just remember that He's still right there beside you. Don't let the silence fool you into thinking He's abandoned you. Trust that God is using this time to teach you something valuable. It may be a season of growth where God is developing patience, trust, and resilience in you. So even when you feel spiritually dry, keep going. Keep praying, keep trusting, and keep waiting. God is with you, and He will never leave you. Now let's talk about something else that can really hinder our spiritual motivation: the feeling that we're not good enough. We can often feel like we've messed up so many times that God could never use us again. If you're struggling with this, remember that you're not alone. God's grace is sufficient for you, no matter how many times you've stumbled. Take a moment and think about Moses again. Moses was a man with an incredible calling on his life, but he was also deeply flawed. His life was full of mistakes, and yet God still chose to use him. In Acts chapter 7, verses 23 to 24, we learn about how Moses, in a fit of anger, killed an Egyptian. Afterward, he ran away, spending 40 years in the wilderness before God spoke to him again. 40 years of silence. Moses may have thought he was disqualified because of his past, but God didn't see it that way. Moses was still part of God's plan despite his failures. If you're feeling disqualified because of something you've done in the past, I want to remind you that God isn't looking for perfect people. He's looking for people who are willing to trust him and keep moving forward no matter how many mistakes they've made. In fact, it's often in our brokenness that God does his greatest work. It's through our weaknesses that his strength is made perfect. So if you feel like you're not good enough, remember that God specializes in using imperfect people. He's not asking for your perfection, he's asking for your heart. Just like he used Moses. He can use you no matter where you've been or what you've done. Don't let your past mistakes keep you from moving forward. Keep going and trust that God can redeem your story. Another important truth to hold on to when you're spiritually unmotivated is the reminder that God's timing is always perfect. We live in a world that values instant results, and when things don't happen quickly, it's easy to feel discouraged. But God doesn't work on our timeline. He works on his. Think about Joseph again. He had to endure so much, being sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Yet God was with him through every step of the journey. Joseph had to wait many years before his dreams were realized, but when the time was right, God elevated him to a position of great influence. Sometimes when we feel stuck, it's because God is waiting for the perfect moment to bring us into his plan. We don't always understand God's timing, but we can trust that it's always for our good. In Psalm chapter 37, verse 7, it says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him." When we're in seasons of waiting, it's important to remember that God is working even if we can't see it. Just because we're not seeing immediate results doesn't mean God isn't preparing us for something incredible. So if you're feeling like you're not making progress or like things are taking too long, remember that God's timing is perfect. Keep trusting, keep praying, and keep moving forward. Your breakthrough is coming, and it will be in God's perfect timing. Finally, let me say this. If you're feeling spiritually unmotivated, it's okay. We all go through seasons where our faith feels dry, and we wonder if we'll ever get back on track. But the key is not to give up. Keep going even when it's hard. God sees you. He knows your struggles, and he's with you in the midst of them. You don't have to have it all together, just keep moving forward one step at a time. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. God has a plan for your life, and he is working even when you can't see it. You are deeply loved, and no matter what you're facing, God will never leave you. Keep trusting, keep hoping, and keep going. Your story is far from over. As we wrap up, let's take a moment to reflect on the final piece of encouragement when you're feeling spiritually unmotivated. You are not alone in this journey. It's easy to feel isolated when we're struggling in our faith, especially in moments of doubt and discouragement. But the truth is, we are all part of a larger story. We're part of a community that has walked through these same struggles, and we're not meant to face them alone. If you feel like no one understands, I want to remind you of something very important. God is with you, and he is using your journey for a purpose. Throughout the Bible, we see that God never called his people to walk alone. Even when things were tough, he sent companions, leaders, and friends to walk alongside them. Think about the Apostle Paul. He endured shipwrecks, imprisonments, and constant opposition, but he never walked alone. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 to 16, Paul writes about how he was abandoned by many of his friends during his imprisonment. He was feeling alone in his suffering. But even in that dark moment, he recognized that God had never abandoned him. In verse 16, Paul says, "But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. Even when others let him down, God was there." The same is true for you. You might feel like you're facing your struggles alone, but I promise you, God is by your side. And he's also placed people in your life, whether it's friends, family, or even a church community, who can help you through tough times. Sometimes the reason we feel alone is because we haven't reached out. So if you're struggling, reach out to those around you. Let them pray with you, encourage you, and walk with you in this journey. You don't have to do this alone. And let's not forget one more thing: God is doing a work in you, even when it feels like nothing is changing. We've talked a lot about how God works in seasons of waiting and how he uses those times to shape us. It's easy to feel like nothing is happening when we don't see immediate results. But sometimes the work God is doing in us is invisible to the naked eye. He's working deep in our hearts, shaping our character, building our patience, and preparing us for the next chapter. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Think about the seed that is planted in the ground. For a long time you don't see any growth and it feels like nothing is happening. But underneath the soil, something is happening. The seed is breaking open, the roots are growing deeper, and the plant is being prepared to break through the surface. In the same way, God is working on you in ways you can't always see. You might not see immediate progress, but that doesn't mean God isn't moving. Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10 says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." When you feel like you're not getting anywhere, remember that God is holding you up. He is strengthening you even in the moments when you feel weak. You might not be able to see all the ways He is working in your life right now, but know that He is faithful to finish the work He has started in you. So if you're feeling spiritually unmotivated today, if you feel like you've messed up too many times, if you feel like you're too far gone, if you feel like you can't keep going, remember that you are not alone. There is a community of believers who are walking alongside you, and above all, God is with you every step of the way. He sees you, He knows you, and He has a plan for your life. I want to encourage you to take one step at a time. Even if you're not feeling it right now, just keep going. Take one small step towards God every day. Whether it's reading a verse, praying for a few minutes, or simply trusting that He's working in your life, don't give up. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And finally, remember that God's love for you is unshakable. No matter how you feel, no matter what you've done, He is always there for you. His love is not based on your performance, it's based on His grace. And that grace is enough. As you move forward in your faith, remember the examples we've talked about today: Moses, Rahab, Elijah, Job, Mary, Joseph, and many more. These were real people who faced real struggles. And yet, through their perseverance and faith, God did incredible things in their lives. And He will do the same in yours. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. God has a purpose for your life, and He will see it through. So keep going. No matter how hard it gets, keep moving forward in faith. God is with you, and He is using your story for His glory. No matter where you are on your spiritual journey, remember, you are never alone, and God's love for you is unshakable. Life can be tough, but every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to the plans God has for you. Keep going, keep trusting, and know that God is with you every step of the way. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we continue to encourage each other on this amazing journey of faith. Take care, and God bless.